Hi, everybody. Welcome to a little Instagram Live talk about cinematography. Thanks for the CSC and Jeremy and Christina for helping put these together. It's a lot of fun for all of us not shooting to talk about what we do and hopefully educate people along the way about the mysteries of our craft. And yeah, so I thought what I'd do today is talk about a couple of recent projects, mostly Watchmen, which was a really interesting project and very unique in a lot of ways, just kind of similar to the comic. It's a lot of people are familiar with the graphic novel, which I definitely recommend people have a look at. It's really great, and it's very complicated. And it's often when you start projects, you have an original script, original idea, and you're inspired by the material directly, and you try and come up with ideas, or at least I do, about how to express what's in it. This was very unique because it had a very strong source material that we knew the audience was going to know. And Damon, our showrunner, who adapted it into this sort of sequel to that graphic novel, like a story would be in that world of the graphic novel, but in the future with similar themes, similar structures to the comic, literally in story and everything else. He actually called it the Old Testament, was the jokes he would make in prep, and he that was the sort of concept. So then we're going to be actually leaning on that heavily of people's knowledge of it, and possibly not just giving little Easter eggs for the types of things in the comic, but then also for us, it was like, well, how do we import some of the visual ideas in the graphic novel to this thing, which led to an exploration of like, are the visual ideas in the actual graphic novel? So that was really interesting. I'm not sure, we have some links to a couple of documents that we had in prep, were made by a couple of our great director assistants, Emily Sheehan and was it Max Davison, I think. I'm sorry. And they were, because this comic was studied a lot because it was unique in a couple of ways. It was kind of written as almost like a commentary to comic characters of the time. So it was creating a drama around what the real personalities might be, as a commentary on maybe the less realistic personalities of the superhero things at the time. So and in doing that, they also wanted to make the comic visually different. So some of the source material that we looked at had these amazingly interesting analysis of all the coloring and how they did the coloring different from other comics, the panel structure, and everything to sort of be different. So this actual style of everybody in it and the colors they used, like using colors for emotion as opposed to characters. And you can do something in the comic where you can have white light on somebody and you'll literally change their color, which you can't do in film. So it became an idea of like, what can we take from that into the show? I joined the show after the pilot. I wasn't available when the pilot was done. It was shot by Andre Perec, who did an amazing job. And part of this very complicated adaptation process that was so great, which is not unusual usually, is we got to basically do it twice. So they did the pilot. At this point, they hadn't quite fleshed out the entire story, because I know Damon from his other shows, he does like to write a bit in the moment and respond to the stuff that gets shot, which is super exciting because then you get to be hopefully involved in inspiring the creation of the rest of the show. But also for planning purposes, it can be more challenging because you're also are changing things more often, and you're pivoting very last minute sometimes. So, but starting episode 2 was basically like doing the pilot again, and they had a chance to look at the pilot and look for the things that they liked and didn't like, and start to develop this process of creating a look. We didn't get married into everything completely on the pilot. It was like, that's the start. Now, how do we keep going? And my director, Nicole Cassell, who's an amazing director and a dear friend who also directed the pilot, we had a chance to actually go back and sort of look at some of the things that we had been done and sort of tweak them and look for new things. So I was going to share a couple of documents of that. Those other materials in the, which we'll get to the links later, are pretty good. And I think they're really worth a look. One of the documents I'm going to show you here is the kind of thing we make in prep that I never expect to show anyone except people on the show, which is one of those things which is now going to happen. And which one is it? Oops, no, that's not it. Well, here's one of the ones that we're going to put on later. Oh, a second. I'm just going to share my screen. This is the kind of thing. This is just an interview with John Higgins talking about coloring the actual show, and it's an analysis of what he did and why. And it's really interesting because it sort of parallels what we often do as cinematographers and production designers in making a show. They basically have the whole same thought process of the graphic novel. So it was really interesting even just to go back and just read how they think and how the kinds of ideas they were using to express, what they wanted to express in the show. We can often live in a little bubble and we think we're doing something unique in our, adapting material and coming up with visuals. And you see something like this and realize you see that all the same kind of thought processes and it was a totally fascinating journey. Oops, there we go, close that. Now I'm just gonna find the other document. Oops. Oh, that's not it. I turned my phone on, I'm sorry, Christine, I'm ignoring you. There we go. And oh, here's another good one here, which is okay. So now just there we go. I've now misplaced the document I'm looking for, but that's okay. Here we go. So yeah, so basically one thing, because I was the first DP there and I had a longer prep, they asked me to sort of come up with some ideas. I worked with Nicole a lot and Tom Speziale and Damon and talking to Javier, who was the next DP that came after me. When he was joining, we sort of came up with some ideas, and we ended up just making this little document, which was, again, not normally for publication. This would not be the kind of thing I would send out, but and we just sort of made like a little a flow chart of a few things. Oh, everyone's saying hello on the Instagram. Hello, everybody. I should say also hello, and I think there's probably a lot of people that worked on the show, hopefully, watching. I know it's early here on the West Coast. I just want to say hi, everybody. And if I forget people or forget things, feel free to chime in on the comments. They'll feed me, selected questions, so we can steer the discussion as it goes and keep it a live event, so we can keep everybody involved, and hopefully steer it more to the also things you want to learn. So yeah. Anyway, so we started with this idea. So here, Brooklyn was the title of our show because it was a code name, of course. No one could know we're making Watchmen, which is very recognizable. We had to all wear, disguises and everything like that. No, we didn't wear disguises, but okay. So, and an interesting thing about this, similar to the comic has this really interesting structure as a parallel story called The Black Freighter, which is basically it's a shipwreck story, survival story that a kid is reading in a comic book in a newsstand. And Damon really wanted to echo that idea in a couple ways in the show and do a sort of a show within a show, like a mythical retelling of the heroes of this, which is the past in 1985, in the present in sort of a cheesy, over the top TV show that was like really overly celebrating these people. So that would be one world. And then there'd be our main sort of Brooklyn world, which would be what we were going to try and discover. And then we knew we had flashbacks of various kinds. We didn't know how many. That was a tricky part at the beginning. We don't know how many. And obviously if you're building palettes and things, you have to you can easily get boxed into a corner. I had an amazing ally and on this project, which is our production designer, Christian Milstead. He had done the UK show Utopia, which, although it was very low budget, he achieved an amazing amount of consistency and interesting look by really restricting the palette. And we went through that and realized it's really removing certain colors, and which is similar to what they did on the graphic novel, which was they used secondaries, not a lot of primaries, colored the book in sequence, kind of it changes as it goes, which is what we would do in a film. I try and like make a visual journey that sort of lines up with the characters. And so we started with, okay, what's the Brooklyn world? What's the main world? And we'll figure out how to branch out to that. So again, maybe secondary colors. We like the idea of maybe not having bright colors except the yellow, which was so iconic because it's the brightest thing. It's the brightest color to the eye. It's forever associated with Watchmen as a sort of as a brand. And it was already used in the pilot in some specific ways, like for these masks, it's very iconic because you want to notice that these police are wearing these big yellow masks, because we want right away for you to go, okay, this is a weird world, and it's a great identifier to see that right away. It was a great choice by Megan, our costume designer, who did come back for the series and was also an incredible person to work with. So, just some ideas for color palette, just pulling things from other films, looking at stuff that's more muted and not experimenting with what that would be. I knew that film noir was going to play a role because the original comic is a murder mystery, and the pilot starts with a murder that's a mystery. And I know Dan was going to echo the structure. And so I was like, well, how do we do maybe, a film noir-ish with some of these graphic novel things? So it's like, first of all, looking for tones, things we would like, reflections, obscuring things, playing different ways of obscuring things. I'd done quite a bit of work like that on a television show called The Killing that Nicole also worked on, and we did a few episodes of that together. And that was a very observational show. We had a lot of shooting through glass, being a little farther away from characters and letting them move around and framing them with things. And graphic novel compositions are often framed with both characters and things, you know, because of course you can draw anything you want. You can bend the room, you can just draw them as you like. So they can be very precise with that. And I thought that kind of level of precision might be interesting if we can be consistent with it to also feel like a graphic novel. So these are just some of the ideas. I mean, you'll recognize some of these films, some of my favorite cinematographers of all time in here. You know, and just sort of some color ideas, restricted, there's not a lot of bright colors. Yeah, so here's just some compositional ideas, just trying to be bold and trying to make the, you know, make the compositions if possible, you know, think about how they're going to cut together. Because this is something that came up in the editing of the pilot. And, you know, as cinematographers, you know, depending on how we're, you know, engaged, or also just what we're asked to do, you know, composition is a big part of storytelling. It's a big part of directing the eye and changing the way we look at characters. And often, sometimes, if we're, especially in television, where there's a high pressure to maybe shoot a lot of extra coverage, or extra coverage, or just to cover scenes sufficiently that they can tweak them later. Because the really good writers do like to tweak their scenes later. They'll take lines out. And sometimes you can, in a haste, you can end up just ending with a lot of shots that are kind of the same and don't really say anything new. And more importantly, don't really are designed to necessarily go in sequence together. This is all dependent on the director, of course, which is, you know, the ultimate arbiter of how we might shoot a scene together. And I've worked with many of very different styles, but it also depends on the taste of and the way that the showrunners work. And the one thing I've learned now that I've got a bit more experience, which I found really interesting, is they're all as individual as, you know, as the cinematographers and directors. So how, like, what their creative process is like in post, or how they, you know, screen dailies, how they look at things. I'll leave some images on here so you're not just watching the title. You know, also affects kind of things you want to, you know, pitch, how you pitch ideas to them, but also what will be successful, what's going to fit into how they work. And I think one thing on the pilot, because it was a pilot, so you're all trying a lot of things, and, you know, we don't want to just do one thing on a pilot sometimes. Do you want people to have a chance to respond to style and things? So they did shoot quite a bit of coverage and move the camera a lot, and there was some, not a lot, but there was some movement, and there was a lot of exploration to look for things, and they found some really amazing stuff. But something in the editing process also is that also can be a bit overwhelming at times if you do shoot a lot of material. And you don't have all the time in the world to go through everything. There could be a little great couple of moments, but if it's buried in 7 takes and you've got 2, 3 cameras running, you may know it's there, and we may jump up and down when you see it on the monitor. But, you know, to rely on them to log it all and really find it is actually quite tough. And it also depends on the type of shows that they've done. And you know, Damon's wrote some really incredible shows. This was going to be very different visually, though, and, you know, I was determined to help. To make it that way. I've been handed this opportunity, which is both terrifying and wonderful. And I realized also, when looking at the pilot, that it actually, you know, it almost gave them too many options, I think, in some ways. And it was kind of difficult to sift through and find that. So, and also just from a shooting standpoint, we would have less time in the series probably. So we sort of made a concerted effort to, like, let's try and pick some interesting compositions or get some ideas to inspire us, even if these aren't exactly what we would do. But, you know, I use a foreground, background, different use of focus, and things like that, and try and bring that into really, really remember to do that, and hopefully give them material that looks, every shot should look really strong and striking. And that way, when they go together, even if they're, you know, if the scenes can be tweaked, or character might be, you know, reduced in a scene or given more lines, you're still going to maintain like some interesting visual structure as the cuts go. You're not going to end up with two similar sized close-ups with similarly lit faces. You want to, you know, make a statement. One should be silhouette, and one should be more lit. Just something like that to really pay attention. And that was exciting. This is something that more just strong compositions, right? They're like saying a lot of things. Like this one, of course, very famous, but it's the same, it's exact same concept as this from Duel, which is the upper left corner, which is, you know, that's Dennis Weaver down there, and the giant truck. He's tiny, dead center frame, right? And he's the focus of our story, but he's totally dwarfed by this opposing force. And like, I love, you know, compositions like that. And that's actually from Terminator 2, in the little window to the restraining room there with the one eye from the other character. Like, that's a very graphic novel type of thing to do. And so we tried to come up with this, so, just to inspire us and try and do more things like this. And obstructions. Some of these are things I've shot. Some of these are from The Killing. They've been walking reflections. A lot of this show is about identity and what identities are. And this is the same in the comic. It's about people wearing masks as vigilantes. But there's a big psychological element because a lot of the characters are completely unaware of who they are or who they're hiding or what they're hiding. And similar to the original graphic novel, again, it becomes a lot about trauma and what people are, like, they're behaving in a way which isn't really lining up or admitting or acknowledging kind of, where it's coming from and what it's making up for. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Like reflections is one. And so, I didn't have to get in. Even before I, joined the show, Damon had already done that with one character by giving him a mirror mask, which is like just a genius concept for somebody who's, looks like he's got all his profanity shit together. And you later find out he's as unhinged as everybody else. And it's just a great device. And so, obscuring characters and doing interesting, odd reflections that are this is a tilt focus lens, which we also used. And just, the film noir, like silhouette, strong contrast. I thought contrast was going to be important just in film noir in general. And I thought if we could establish strong contrast in a lot of areas, both, lighting wise and design wise, that would really also give us the kind of, graphic things when you cut to that you can really see where the lines are and see where the power structures are. And then, Christian was great for this too. We were talking about that with sets, and it's a great set example coming up. Some more film noir things, which I think we've all sort of seen before. And here's a great example. This is The Matrix, of course, everyone knows this film a lot, but there's some great things in here which you forget about, like the split diopter shot with the ear, or you just look at the cuts. And this is something that I find really interesting. If everyone ever saw John Seale, who shot Mad Max Fury Road, amongst others, of course, that was when he kind of almost came out of retirement for that one. He sort of learned a lesson, he says, in this long thing where George Miller was like, I want all the close-ups, people framed right in the center, and he's shooting widescreen. So like the center, and then somebody over here that seems like we're always trying to balance a frame and use rules of thirds and things. He's like, nope, dead center. And it was like, really? And so he's cutting people off, and John's like, boy, I don't know what we're doing, but being the consummate professional and artist, he's like, well, George is not, he's not a dummy. This is for a reason. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm gonna get my operators we'll get on board and we'll just keep at it. He's earned the right to experiment in this thing, and there must be a reason. And then he understood right away afterwards, which I think is a really interesting thing we lose sometimes in cinematography, is like where the eye is in the screen when the edit happens. Because what he was losing was he knew that in a lot of these scenes, George is going to edit very quickly. And if you're jumping from one to the other, there's a cut and you are looking at a blank space where there used to be a face, and suddenly over there, something really tiny is happening. You're going to go over there, notice that small thing. Maybe it's a quick cut. Now you're into another shot with something streaking across the frame. It can be very jarring on the eye, actually. And I've always believed that the sort of theory of, one thing about the audience is it's like you are like, reaching out and grabbing their face and guiding them through the story. And, if you want to be rough with them, and make it jarring, that should be for a reason. And if you don't, you don't. You want to make sure that they can, see all the things you want. And these compositions from The Matrix, I mean, this one up and down with the split diopter shot, you'd think you'd compose it the opposite way, right? You'd think you would put Agent Smith on the other side, but these two shots cut together on the bottom, and it's great because she's where he was. And it's like, all of a sudden there's a big thing where he was just the same shape. And then you can look down at his imposing silhouette, which lines up. And it's just an interesting way. Like you would think normally you'd put Agent Smith the other way, but it works really well this way because he's the same shape. And it's also where your eye, then your eye gets to see the new thing and then look over, but it's strong enough. It's not like you're struggling to see what you're looking at. It's almost the same shape, which is, I find really interesting. Here we go. So just some tone references. So we, I should turn on my phone. I'm realizing I'm missing all the questions probably. And Alex is watching. Alex Disnoff, who shot episode 9, which is the incredible wrap-up finale, which had like an episode and a half of material to pack in. Says hello and thanks for being a good leader. That's a very high compliment from somebody as talented as Alex. It was very yeah, it's fun to be in this position with people like this, with, and we've been warned, Christian and I have been warned. Christian shows up, he's the new designer. We really got along right away. We were both handed this thing, and we looked at the, some of the pilot was like, well, I don't understand why they didn't make a decision on this. And they were also overwhelmed by the number of decisions in world building. I mean, it's like you building an entire fictional world that also looks like the real world, that has very specific rules which affect the culture, which affects the characters. That's really messy. I mean, it's really complicated to do. And a lot of stuff in the pilot was like, well, we'll figure it out later. We sort of got an idea, and and then we're like, okay, now we're episode 2. We have to make this make sense. The police station set where all the police live, will work, was a small location on the pilot, and then we rebuilt it because we had a lot more work there in this set, in the story. And Christian was very was adamant, like he wanted to make a real statement with it, because this was a chance to give the police, who we didn't know were going to be a malevolent force or not, but give them some real gravitas and some power to go with the masks. And so we went with this idea of a cathedral-y type thing. So I pitched like this idea that in the pilot, in the scene where Sister Night goes in, we reveal the police station for the first time, and they're watching this 7K video, the terrorists that have, reemerged, the opposing force, the sort of other army in the story, that it would be dark. And then when the briefing would start, the lights could come up, and Christian, because Christian loved the idea of maybe doing it instead of like a briefing room like this, like do it like a Houses of Parliament idea. And it would be very unusual. They'd be sort of facing each other, but it also mean we'd have these lineups of faces, all these symmetry of lining up instead of like lining them up this way. You could still do that in the upshot. So here's a still from at the bottom from, if people don't recognize this, it's a fine film with Gary Oldman playing Churchill called Darkest Hour. And it's an amazing, I love the film, and Bruno Demonel's work is fantastic. And they did this amazing amount of contrast with these bright shafts of light, and the rest of the room kind of falls off. So I thought, well, what if we start with something like this? That above image is actually from Alien 3, shot by Alex Thompson, BSc, and very sort of atmospheric, soft top light, sort of mystery, because you come in. I wanted to walk into the police station. I thought, well, we come in as a mystery. So we pitched this concept for the actual station structure is brutalist, huge. And, we were warned, like, well, Damon is not a huge fan of big sets because they can also do a lot of, it can maybe restrict things sometimes. He likes to be able to, but he was, he knew he was making something different. He's like, no, actually, he totally bought it. So we pitched these ideas, and then I pitched the idea of the light change in the scene, to sort of give it another set of reveals and sort of, let the scene have a move in it visually. And he was like 1,000 times, yes, great. And, it was a little charge at the beginning for him to go, yeah, I love what you're pitching out, that like, yeah, well, there's ways to add layers to this. And he's all about layers, like put layers and dialogue and stuff. And it was really fun. We were glad we made a sale on the first pitch. That was like, okay, one out of the way, got to start building that giant set. Yeah, and then just a couple of little, slogans and sayings. You don't need to read all that, but I think, but that was sort of the idea. That was the beginning of it. And then there are a couple of things, again, sort of like strong frame lines, just like reminders and stuff. And I gave this to all the operators too, because, your operators are not just your crew. I mean, these are all creative people. And, the great thing about this show is this book has such a following and such a love. Both can be polarizing because people, don't want you to mess with a masterpiece, even if you're calling it that and making something new, is that we did attract like a lot of really brilliant people, like Chris, our A operator, and I was a whole list of credits at the end, and John Garrett, B operator, and even our on-set dresser, Nick Hood, who was like a huge Watchmen fan. And there was a lot of effort to get like names of books, like there's names of novels in here that are fictional, and they could pop up in the background and stuff like that. And so even this idea, like, yeah, let's get everyone together and like, think of these things, right? And Johnny Garrett came with some great B frames or like in that style. And it was fun and inspiring to, be handed this much leash, as it were. Terrified, of course, that we would be a complete mess. And so then now we have like, okay, what are we gonna do with American Hero Story, The Other World? That's gonna be the next world, I think. Oh, one more thing, very important. So this is, I'm still on full screen on the thing, but that's okay. So one of the great things in the comic is there's these great match cuts, which are, similar frames. These are actually from the Warner Brothers motion comic, which is basically a sort of narrated version of the original comic artwork. So that out of focus effect in the top 2 frames is sort of there. They're actually cinemizing the artwork. But for this purposes, it was the same shape frame for us. Just pick these two. But it was the idea of like doing a time jump. It's like if you're going to move your story forward quickly, and our story in the script moves really quickly, like the comic, you know, you don't start every scene with them pulling up in their cars and getting out. If he's thinking about something and he's about to be somewhere else, boom, you just cut to him in the same frame in the same place, you know, with a different costume. And it was a really effective device. It became, you instantly knew right away that that character's in like the same headspace but somewhere else. And also it mirrors, you know, in the story, the Dr. Manhattan effect, which is he often experiences things kind of at the same time. He is everywhere at once, and in the audience is having this experience. If you want to get really into it, this is why you can read this comic 25 times and go, okay, I didn't think of that. So that, well, we should do something like that. We have, you know, that character returns. Spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen our show, spoilers, I'll try not to get too much, but Dr. Manhattan's in the show, and this experience recurs. And it just made for some graphic stuff. And, you know, we had a playback operator, so we could do these type of match cuts and, you know, look for opportunities in them. And there are a few in the scripts later. And then always trying to find interesting transitions. You know, one of the things that always amazes me about great directors, and not only can understand the story and the journey of everybody, but also, like, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, like part of, I think, our job and all of our jobs as sort of assistant storytellers is also to shepherd them on the journey. You know, I'm going to grab them by the eyes, I'm going to show them things, but you know, I'm going to be deliberate with what I do, hopefully. And transitions are a great way because they can really affect how you go in the next scene. A shift in energy and time and tone. And then you'll see writers like Damon, who writes with like an amazingly hilarious, muscular, his scripts are like, he's like he's like around the campfire, and this is going to happen, and it's like he's excitedly telling you the story, which is great because you really then get like what he's going for with, you know, he'll literally put WTF in a script sometimes, which is like both the audience reaction and maybe a character to something very unusual. And it can really cue you off as to what to do. And sometimes they're like energy transitions. There's a scene in episode 4 where Sister Knight's disposing of something, and then she's witnessed by a completely comical looking character in a silver jumpsuit, which looks completely ridiculous and out of place. And it's like, what is going on? Even for this world, it seems very strange. And then suddenly she's chasing him down, and it gets more and more crazy until he basically squirts lubricant all over himself and then slides into a sewer drain like that has no clearance for his head, like just completely ridiculous. And even though that's not a transition thing visually, there's a huge, like, you know, energy transition in the episode because it's both really funny and really unusual, and it lets you know that, like, okay, anything can kind of go here. So we know she's in trouble. Maybe she's committed a bit of a crime by covering something up, and now we know that all bets are off. I mean, someone could come out of the walls and reveal her, and it both gave attention, but also was really funny. But these ideas of, you know, this is one of my favorite transitions from Blood Simple, you know, the Coen brothers' first film, where it's like ceiling fans. Look at the ceiling fan, maybe cut to another ceiling fan, tilt down, you're somewhere else. Like you cut to something you expect to see in the opposite cut, and then suddenly you're somewhere else, and you just almost get fooled, you know. And it could be, again, maybe a character in the same place. One of the greatest match cuts, no pun there intended, from Lawrence of Arabia, like cutting on action, like the moment the match like it disappears, you're boom, it's flat, and then the sun comes up. Tiny sun and all that. And it was just fun to sort of really think about this and have the time to try and plot them out together. I need to keep my phone on. I'm missing all the questions and stuff. Pause while I read momentarily. Oh, no questions. Okay, good. I'll just keep talking then. Hopefully it isn't just tuning out. Oh yeah, the reflections. Yeah, we didn't mention that in The Killing, and that was definitely something that, you know, it was helpful actually because I worked with Nicole a few times, and we were doing stuff that was pretty different than what we'd done before, which was exciting. So at least, you know, we had familiarity with each other and a lot of trust to try things. And even though we were trying stuff that was quite new and you know, taking a pretty big swing. Oh yeah, and then episode 6. Well, yeah, I'm going to talk about episode 6, I think, after I get through this stuff, because things get very different. So here's some match cuts and things like that. Like just again going with the where his face is, and suddenly you're looking at the weapon in the next cut, Agent Smith to that. Like that's the edit. And one of the reasons, here's an irony of this thing. One of the reasons that The Matrix, I think, is like this is when they were trying to pitch the script, Lana and oh, sorry, I've got a little a thing came up. Pardon me, ignore the calendar. So one of the things that happened when they're trying to pitch the movie, because it was basically, you could say kung fu versus robots in some ways, but it was a very complicated world to imagine reading and making sense of, especially with the real world being the real world being the weird world, the imaginary world, and not. So they were asked to like give us like basically do some storyboards to do it, and they ended up kind of doing the entire movie as kind of a graphic novel. But I think by doing that, it helped them with their own script, find the story beats and the cuts and the compositions to do single story beats and single shots really well. And I think the film is so strong because of it. It sort of feels very, very precise. And that was something that was, I thought we should try and emulate if we could. Oh yeah, now we have the flashback. So now we have the classic. Okay, we know with 1918, we got 1936 at this point, and we want it to be different. And I know I want a lot of contrast in the main world. So maybe some with less contrast, a little less color. It sort of fit in. They tried like a very sepia thing on the flashbacks in the pilot. I thought there was a little bit too in the grade. It was a very quick grade, and Todd Bachner, who's the lead colorist and colored the whole show, he basically was given no time at all to color the pilot for the presentation because it wasn't going to air. It was for the executives, and they gave him very little time. And when I talked to him, I said, "Yeah, I did nothing. It was like to quickly throw this on and keep the tone of it, but it was not a finessed thing." And so we tweaked it a little bit. And I looked at some ideas, and here's some references of stuff that's less contrast and still has some blending contrast, but a little softer, which I really liked, and we try that. And then maybe we'd go the other way with the American Hero Story. Maybe we'd go the thing that like the Watchmen comic didn't do, which was primary colors, bright things. Could still have big contrast. Could still use the other transitions and split diopters, which we used. But it would be really stand out, and the costumes would be like that, and Megan would do some of that. And again, extensive testing was required because if I'm going to add more color or have a different LUT, if Megan's making it brighter too, we can't double everything up and then suddenly end with 4 times the brightness of color that we intended, because that can be difficult. And yeah, I should talk about the testing process a little bit. Here's some brighter contrast, and this is filmed throughout Bob Richardson, from Kill Bill, and that shot is from an early Denis Villeneuve film called Maelstrom. It's sort of a bleached bypass, but like they pumped a lot of color into it. It's softer and nice, but it has a similarly massive toughness. More contrast, harder lighting maybe. The idea of using harder lighting was something I was toying with, because normally I don't do that too much. I tend to try and keep things softer and a bit more natural, even if there's a lot of contrast. And then sort of bend it that way in whatever way makes sense for the scene. But hard lighting can be really interesting at times, and I thought it would be interesting ways to pick that up. In certain times, I didn't quite figure out where I was going to go yet, but I wanted to bring it up as a discussion piece. The trick with harder lighting also is you often end up using many more fixtures, and as we know, even in cable television like this, we don't have endless amounts of time. So doing too much, setting 20 lights is not something I can easily do with precision in not a lot of time. So, and then we have the other thing. Spoiler alert: if you haven't seen the show, the blonde man in the script, this mysterious man on the horse riding in this weird, very Wales-like landscape, was Jeremy Irons. And Jeremy Irons plays Adrian Veidt, who's the main, one of the main characters, who turns out to be the villainous character in this. And it's some mysterious place. And so this had to be, Damon was very in the script. It just had to feel like you're in a different movie all of a sudden, like you're totally somewhere else. And most of that was done by being location. All this material on the location in the castle was shot by Chris Seeger. And this was actually happening because of the need to shoot it in Wales before we did the rest shoot. This actually shot first, some of it. So I was like a few weeks into prep, juggling the idea of the colors of the show, and we're picking colors with Christian and working tests. At the same time, Chris is already shooting. So we had a great Skype talk one day about lenses, about what to do, and which I could talk about in a second. And I was just coming to some ideas of what to have. And he said, yeah, actually, we'll mix these two things. And he picked his lenses for that. Like I said, well, in the end, different lenses for that. Anything to give it a slightly different thing will be good. So he picked Panavision primes for that, and I used Cooke S5s for the main Watchmen world. And I carried 3 anamorphic lenses, a 50, a 75, and 100 on the package at the beginning, because I wanted to. One thing about the graphic novel situation, which is more indicative of the earlier scene, is everything's drawn sharp, so you can look around the way you want, right? Here's something in the background, you don't want you to look anywhere else. But in scenes where there's lots of information, everything is in focus, and which can be great. Like a deep focus look, it can be really lovely. It doesn't get used much these days. But also, I knew I wanted to be able to have the option, and I didn't want to take the take the tool away of using focus for storytelling and for hiding things like translights or backgrounds. So I have to light day for night, or all the things we might have to do just to get our shots done, or to be able to cheat close-ups other places. I knew it would be maybe unwise to go after something so hard as a concept that we would not be able to pull it off well. It would handicap us too much. And knowing that the show was still developing the look, and we were really early in this, I didn't have the full confidence to try something as extreme as that, because it might have really backfired on us. So, but I thought it'd be nice to have a bit of both. So with anamorphic and the medium shots, I can blur, the bokeh's different, and you can put things in the foreground, and it can change shape more radically. And that was a interesting idea for that. And then Cooke S5s, because I'd used them before on The Killing, actually, in season 2, 3, and 4. And I like the lenses. They still have the nice sort of round, feel, and they can be nice on skin when they need to be. And I wanted something that was pretty fast, like a 1.4, just for times when I didn't want to sort of artificially make the focus really shallow and get into something that was very, very low light, and just have that option to have something different. And then we would just use sometimes different lenses for this. We were using the same in the end for the Mercure story. So then we have Blonde Man World, basically wants to be Merchant Ivory in space. That was a joke, if you remember those days of all their amazing films. And yeah, Chris did a beautiful job, like just all classically beautiful, a lot of white light. We didn't add any colored light. It was all about getting the colors of natural locations and the stone and the costumes and their skin tones nice. And yeah, he did a fantastic job. And it was great to see that coming in, like, okay, wow, look at this show, holy cow, it's Jeremy Irons, in these comically weird scenes, which you have no idea what's going on. They make no sense to anybody. And then we're watching them from the entire season before we even got the scripts for later ones, because he's in his own world for most of the beginning of the story. But it was very inspiring to get that, and it was a real shot in the arm. Just some favorite films, some of these are from Nikki, some from other people. And that was sort of it. And then we sort of, myself back on there. And that was sort of the beginning. So one of the things about the focus was the idea of using split diopters. So as well as having anamorphic for making some different bokeh and stretching the out of focus a little bit more. I would carry one set of swing and tilt lenses, which is like the small bellows thing where you can basically bend the plane. And I'm sorry, I don't know, this is maybe half Instagram people who are just totally mystified by what I'm talking about. But for all the cinematographers, we know what those can do. You basically, lenses are designed to focus the image on a flat. Now it used to be film plane, but now it's mostly a sensor usually. And if you take the lens and you twist it off axis, the plane is focused and the plane will be twisted. In which case, only a small portion of the plane lines up with the plane of the sensor, which means that only a little band is going to be in focus. So you can tilt it and bend it, or you can line up the focus to the plane of an object and have two people in focus that would normally never be in focus, which can be, off-putting or very interesting if you want your eye to be going back and forth. That was sort of the idea of giving the audience a chance to look and letting them, pick through the frames and see things. So with more static compositions, stronger compositions, so we can control where things were in the frame, and having this ability to use focus. And I'll bring up an example of that in a sec here. I'm just going to quickly look at the questions. Cody is asking in the opening of episode 6 with Hooded Justice. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I'll bring that setup up in a second. Let me get to that in a minute. Cody, remind me. I'll go back because I want to. That is a split diopter shot, but I'll bring it up in a second. Yeah, so it's Arthur Cooper, hello Arthur, is asking about the testing process. Okay, let me go. So yeah, so Arthur, I sort of followed the testing process I've done with most projects. It's just I had to sort of repeat it for every sort of the worlds, and so, and also trying to cut myself into corners. So format was sort of dictated because the pilot was done. So okay, we knew we were going to be shooting with this, certain thing. I toyed initially. I did test 2 different cameras, but knowing I was going to have to cut a lot of stuff into the pilot, we did probably about 30% of it, and there was flashbacks that were coming back from the pilot. We don't want things to be too crazy. I picked different lenses. Andre used Leicas on the pilot. But that's not a subtle enough difference to be worried about. But camera format or different type of sensor would prove to be too difficult, I think. And I love the Alexa. And I love the Mini. I picked a small camera because I wanted to be able to put it in small spaces. We were going to be in some small locations, even though we're doing a lot of static compositions. A little body can be very handy. And then we picked 3. That way we had 3 of the same, and I can leave one built on a Ronin or on a Steadicam, and depending on the day, and it would really help us move quick. So if we had to do one shot this way, boom, bring in the next camera. And it was, obviously it's more expensive to do that in terms of equipment, but it paid dividends, and everybody on board. I have to credit Ron Schmidt and Karen Wacker, our UPM and line producer, because they really got that. They really got that stuff. I mean, this show lands on everyone's laps. Like, okay, want to open this thing? And page 2, like the first 3 pages of episode 2 have, World War I, the German War Office. You're jumping around, then you're in the 30s, and you're like, this is like the first 2 pages, and you're like, okay, this is going to be a bit much, and it's going to be tricky to pull off. So, they did really back us up with the tools. I mean, like I say, the producers were really giving us a lot of slack to try and create this, and they gave us the support we needed, even though sometimes it was all new to them. Like, I don't know if this was the kind of show we're doing this, and suddenly, oh, now we know we are this kind of show. And we started to get some results, and that really charged people up for the daily. So but anyway, the split diopter was one, and these tilt focus, and that we always have that in the hand. And then if there's an idea to, actually this might be better to see these things together. So let me bring up an example of some of that. Well, we still have some visual things to do. Oh yeah, with the testing process, that's what I was talking with Arthur. So what I will normally do is I'll try and set up, if I can do one general test when we're a bit closer to realizing the show, and Christian might have a lot of paint chips, various types of sets. He's starting to place the palette for what the character sets will look like. I'll try and include them too. So if I get a big enough stage area, we'll do a face and a color chart. I do a white and black reference. I do like a white thing, which I'll blow out really, really hot in one corner, and then up to more normal white, and a black reference, which would be like a black tube. So the idea is no lights hitting the back of the tube, and then if anything you'd see in that would just be the glow off the lens that's coming back from the stuff that you're photographing. And then you can sort of get an idea of what the contrast of the lenses are, and see something that should be black, and sort of see all those ranges, and then pepper the scene with maybe some practicals that'll be used, lights, things that might flare sort of in the background, and various panels of the colors that Christian would have, and grouped together associated with the same set. And then it's also then if I'm building then the process is basically building a viewing LUT. So I look at a viewing LUT as basically like a film stock, because when we first got into digital and we were using Rec 709, which is nothing usually like the shows will look like later. I didn't find those useful, and the doing Alexa on Game of Thrones for 3 years when I joined, I had a couple of LUTs I'd used before, and all the DPs are different, and we all have our own ways of seeing things and own ways of looking at things, and you get comfortable with what you're doing. And I learned a couple things from a couple DPs there who I really admire, but we all had different tastes on LUTs. But the coloring of the show was so specific on Thrones that I was like really interested. There's something going on I couldn't quite put my finger on. And of course, once I shot 2 episodes and I went to LA to sit at the suite with Joe Finley, who's a total genius. He had gone when the Alexa was a prototype camera, and he was like, how am I going to treat this thing to make it the kind of film I want, the kind of contrast I want based on the armor and the sort of skies, and there's a lot. It's quite a contrasty show, like where he'll put the blacks to, and amount of saturation without it getting into the problem of, you know, electronically looking green, for example, which is the main channel. It always gets brighter. And so we really did some interesting things, sort of suppressing the green and swinging certain things. I mean, one of the byproducts was blue ended up being a little hotter, which in the Game of Thrones world actually being very useful, even just as color contrast. Like the reflections in the armor suddenly really popped because you could really see blue in the sky in these things, and suddenly the whole armor looked like a, you know, the detail of the weathering was amazing. So anyway, so we did a lot of work with that, but if I took what I'd shot and put what he would for his baseline, I was like, oh, that's different. Like, okay, now I'm not going to use full blue at night. I'll use half blue because it's going to turn a bit different with the way he's doing it. And you know, like a lot of the people in TV, Game of Thrones, ironically, did not have a huge budget, especially when it started, like for production. But they didn't have a lot of time to finish it. He's not coloring a feature where he's, you know, spending a lot of time. He developed a lot of quick shortcuts for himself, and one of them was, okay, what's my sort of base setup? If the exposure is about right, I can put this on, grade through it, get very close very quickly. So I asked him to build me a LUT, something like that. And I shot tests the next year. And anyway, he got something pretty close. It was a bit too magenta at the beginning, but it was super useful because I'm feeling like now, if I light to this and get pretty close, he's going to be so close for him. He could spend more time polishing. And more importantly, on set, we look at something that's closer. And then the dailies can be a little easier to make closer. And then everyone watching the show that is, you know, working on the show sees a monitor that's a bit closer to where hopefully it'll end up, you know, they've already established, you know, the contrast levels and stuff from earlier seasons. And it was really helpful. So I try and apply that sort of idea to everything. This was difficult because of all the different worlds. So Watchmen, I tried a little bit of less color, didn't want to go to matrix green, a bit more contrast, sort of a film look, if you can imagine that, but never getting things electronic ever, like trying to keep that out of it. And then by primary colors and more saturation in American Hero Story, even if the contrast was similar, it would still pop because of the crispness of the brighter colors themselves that were absent in the set deck and stuff would really pop out. And then little sort of flashback purpose of sort of like a little less contrast and a little less look, and varying types of sepia. But it's basically a series of tests, Arthur. So we do the same place and with the, you know, and then treat them differently, build a bunch of LUTs, try a few. You know, I went to LA to work with Todd. We played around with a lot of things. He was like really excited about this sort of like more contrast thing, which was a newer thing, or not newer, but like something that they hadn't done a lot before in recent memory. So it was fun to try and come up with something a little more original. And then of course we had tested lenses and all the focus things, tried ideas, because then I can show not just a reference image, but like, here's what we shot today, and show Nikki, what about this idea, and put those ideas in your director's heads that there's possible, and they're, you know, right here. And if you got the idea, we can bring it out quick. And it was a good chance to work with our crew together and get to know Chris and Liam, our first assistant, who was like, oh, I think there's a set of sliding diopters in town. It's like, well, great, that will be ours if we're so lucky. And yeah, Panavision's provide our equipment, who also did our equipment in LA, and no, in Wales, I'm not sure. Anyway, that was the testing process, or the beginning of it. And oh yeah, Todd just texted me. I forgot to tag him on this, and he just missed me talking about him. Anyway, so here's another question here. So that was the testing process. And then also we're also doing stuff to see what we're, like how we're doing, you know, get notes in the first couple of days, and adjust as you go, right? Talk about it every now and again, and, you know, include everybody in those conversations in the team. Here's the thing. I mean, so now after we shot a few episodes, we were coming back from after hiatus. So we shot 5 episodes at that point. We had longer Christmas break. They wanted us more time in post to kind of analyze what we'd all been doing, and also spend some time they were tweaking the story as well with, you know, the things we were doing and how it goes. And that's what I kind of expected with, you know, Damon being responsive to things and wanting to kind of be in the crucible of, as everything is coming together, you know, really tweaking it and finding all these ways to make things connect. And we had a little meeting about, well, let's just see how we've been doing. So I'm just going to open up some pictures here, just some frames that we sort of like, we were talking about liking, not liking, or things like that. So let me just pull that up here. These are from the dailies, so these are not graded at all, or just the sort of the LUT, and it will tend to end up looking a bit flat. I tweaked it a little bit after that because the dailies sometimes were getting a bit too flat and weren't quite the contrast. Here's Lady True in episode 4, a very specifically lit scene, mostly also for the purpose, like a soft top light. But the room is just big enough to make the room fall off a little bit and, again, give it some contrast. This is from Javier's episode. This is the amazing carnival scene that begins with the looking glasses flashback. Again, like, there's some darker, muddier colors in here, right? But that's missing the VFX, of course, for the extension. Here's one of the flashback sort of like looks. This is young Will looking at his army coat, finding the look after this boy note to be done later. And here we have old man Will talking to Regina King in the bakery. And again, and actually Damon wrote a lighting cue, which we sort of got, where he wanted to sort of lean into some light at one point, like almost, and I was like, did you go full Colonel Kurtz? The reference from Apocalypse Now, where he's just basically is totally invisible out of the light. He just sort of like brings his head in as he's, mumbling his line. And Lou Gossett did it once. It didn't quite land as specifically as we wanted, I don't think, but it's there though. And it gives him, again, a sense of motion. And that's something interesting too, because there's, in terms of contrast and trying to create film noir contrast, another thing that I figured out with working with different filmmakers is, everyone has their tastes in when they want to use close-ups and how often. I tend to like things more wide and you save them if possible, because they can be quite impactful, especially with the amazing cast that we have. But then I realized, well, if let's say an episode, it becomes a lot more close-ups because of the type of scene it is, I need to be able to scale down the look we want into this thing. So if I want color contrast, I've got to have 2 colors on his face, and I've got to sort of miniaturize everything into a way that those ideas are still present in each shot, so that they're still around. It doesn't end up being only a evenly lit face against a dark background, unless it's for effect. And so this was this is on the first week of shooting. So this was an attempt, even though it's just basically a night interior, I wanted at least 3 things hitting him. We wanted some sodium, something was like a white thing, which would give us the proper color of his coat, because his coat becomes a real clue to his identity. So we had a bit of white light on that, and then like a bounce at the window for sort of like a moon or whatever, ambient moon, or sort of mercury green nighttime light. And there's this color back here you can't quite see in this scene. And also picked sodium because it looked like there was going to be some locations where there would be sodiums in the background, and we wouldn't be able to always own the whole place. We weren't probably have the budget to do that in our exteriors, because we'd be shooting in places that were busy and had people, and it gets a bit tricky. So that's that one, and then let's just see down here. Oh yeah, this was one of the pilot reshoots. This was the young redneck guy getting arrested or getting questioned, and then it turns out he's a 7K terrorist, and he guns down the police officer. So a role reversal, both in the the racial stereotypes of this type of arrest, of unwanted stopping, unwarranted stopping, and also of the surprise that he's also a villain, and also the surprise of the yellow mask, and all this stuff comes out in this scene. And we hid the mask better. I mean, this is a scene that had so many complicated beats in it, and there's so many things about, is this character supposed to be, or do you want to read that he's a villain, or do you want to read how much do you want out of him, and how intimidating should the police officer be, and then also how you do that graphically, and how do we make an elegant reveal of this yellow mask, which is really strong. And by Nikki shooting the scene once, they watched it, and they decided they actually wanted to change the actor, because I think this character comes back, and they wanted someone a bit different, and they wanted to shift the tone of it a bit. And also visually, for me, it's like, wow, we had a whole chance to a second draft. I mean, normally we don't get a second draft. We're lighting a scene. It's like, hopefully by the time we're finished, we shoot, that's it. But to do something and do it again and go, okay, now I can make this better. That's one thing that television sometimes can afford. And so we managed to tweak a lot of things, including the look and the bit more of film noir, more silhouettes. He was totally obscured. You never see the police officer until you see his mask, when he's, the one line of dialogue comes out that makes him look a bit more intimidating. And it turned out great. And it was, all the power to Gold Gazelle, because this scene is really fantastic. A lot of foreground elements. This is in the bakery again. This is that sort of wider shot. Now you can see the colors. There's a bit of green over here. It is a sodium streak, with a little Lico, just to make it look like it's something far away. And sort of like the bluer ambience. And then, we hit a little stuff around Edison and the gaffer the first 5 episodes. we'd use a lot of LED tubes just for a bit of fill, for trying to put a shine on some of the foreground. And we were liberal with the foreground. This is like a staircase. None of this stuff, was anywhere near the same place when you looked the other way. It was sort of in the room, but it wasn't like, we're not going to be slave to that. I was like, well, let's just compose with it and use it for what it is. Oh, here we go. Flare. This is in that scene, the road stop, make a graphic composition. This is Johnny's camera, I think. I was like, yeah, I think there's something over here, because I put droplets on the window because I really wanted to have the ability to have this type of effect, even though it might rain. There was a good chance it could rain, but it made for something really interesting. It obscured him. It totally obscures the cop, because there's his yellow mask at the barely visible, and next to the top dot, you just sort of see the police officer there. And the light is super bright, so that way the flashlight is the real light in the scene. And when it's on his face in the next shot, like, it's really interrogation, right? It's really like, he is in the crosshairs, literally. And it worked really well. And yeah, I just like this composition. It's very brief in the cut, but it's sort of, the police officer kind of boxed into his own thing, which seems also like the graphic novel type of thing, like where you place someone. In this case, he's got no one with him. He's all by himself. And oh yeah, this was day one of the day one of the entire season on episode 2. This was the second scene of the day. First scene, we were in the German War Office with the secretary typing with the period typewriters, typing the note, which will end up in Will's pocket later. And they did that scene, which is a whole different look and everything. And then we had to pack up all our gear and run across to a different room and go to this tiny set. And this is an anamorphic lens. This shot, that's a translight that's impossibly close, because this room we built, the set in, is massively tiny. Like incredibly small, and it was useful for that. And here's sort of a film noir moment of Don Johnson playing the mysterious Judd Crawford, waiting to address the troops in the sort of dim, top lit room. That's the room we ended up building, and he's like, he's just sitting here quietly. And I think it was Nikki, I think, suggested this. I think it wasn't in the script. I think Don liked the idea too, of like, he was just sort of silently listening to this terrifying terrorist video, and because we don't really know his involvement in this, as he has a grudge against them because he's been the police chief a long time, but it's sort of mysterious just watching him listen. And he tried a couple different positions, and like back to it seemed nice. It seemed the most sort of semi-resigned, and I think it added some tension. Then he walked out, we pushed in and over top with a really wide lens to see everything else. And yeah, there's the end of the shot, you push in over top, and there's a projector showing the thing, and then we'll get a big, I think I have a light change in here. Reflections. This is in the A-Bar house. So that's, her husband, Cal, who's just Cal at this point, and Regina. This clock is important because it's referred to in this, this attack on their home a long time ago and rebuilt. And clocks are like a huge thing in Watchmen, not just because it's a watch, but because of the element of time in Dr. Manhattan's story, his relationship to it. So the idea of reflecting them together in this clock in episode 2, when you've no idea that, Cal, spoiler alert, Cal may or may not be secretly Dr. Manhattan in disguise, that he doesn't even know he's in disguise, which is kind of a clever nod. And it was something that, you might see, I thought might see in that style of comic. Yeah, Judd's office, a lot more contrast than the previous version, because it was a small room, and this kind of thing, like using a strong edge light to give him some presence, but leave him, he's a mysterious character, but he's also very jovial and nice. He has these moments in the pilot, you're like, oh, this is the only guy I really like. He seems like real, and he's thoughtful. And in here, it's like, what's he doing? Like, he's deliberately cut his friend out of this thing. This is mysterious. Amazing work by Chris Seeger in the UK with this incredible theater scene. Again, like a nice, simple palette, very classic, doesn't give away, there's no tells when this could be, which was the whole point. And here's Old Man Will in the bakery again. It's just lit with mostly a fluorescent tube, an LED tube, pretending to be a fluorescent tube underneath the vent of the little stove there. And just like, again, contrast, a little bit of color. There's no set out there. That's just a piece of plastic, and there's a door to be the location. And yeah, this kind of thing. Again, like foreground objects and things like that. So this was we so basically went through, and here's what's great about working with people like this is that with Nikki and everybody else is the idea of like, okay, well, let's sit down, look at the stuff that we didn't like, and there were some dailies that were a bit bright, and it's to no fault of their own. It just still, our colorist was, just got slightly lost one day, and it wasn't a big deal. But also it was like, oh yeah, maybe we should actually get them to make them a bit darker, because maybe we can get a little more of our final look in our dailies, because that's kind of where we're all living in our headspace. And we just looked at what our favorite shots were, that we did ones that we thought would work, and maybe it doesn't work. The cuts are coming in, and you sort of adapt and adjust. And that constant, run of adaptation and picking what's good, I find, is one of the most interesting things about this. And again, kudos to getting the chance to do that. Look at the phones. I think I'm. Here we go. Let me just quickly. Yeah, Cozy asking about episode 6. I'll get to that in a second. Oh, here we go. It's 1 p.m. I get to finish in 40 minutes. Oh dear. I think so. Okay. Oh yeah. Here's a good question from Andre. So about the LUT thing, it's a good cinematography question. So we shoot like in a raw type format. We were shooting the ProRes format, and so Andre. Yeah, the idea there is yes. If I look at the monitors calibrated correctly, shoot with the LUT, you're going to be usually pretty safe. But what I like to do, and also especially in a show which has this much darkness, it's just something that I learned on Game of Thrones from the taste of the post producer from Greg Spence. They were really adverse to noise, whereas on other shows that Damon has done, they've added noise, they've added grains. They were trying to not have too much electronic look, so they had like a sort of a higher contrast, like maybe a glossy look, but they added a lot of noise. Well, Thrones was the opposite. They would want to take the noise away. So their preference was to make sure that even the dark scenes, nothing went below a certain IRE to assume you had enough definition in it to color. And part of the explanation for that, Andre, is there's lots of good stuff to read about this, but is basically you have gray or sort of white light in all your pixels. That way there's actually color information to move. Because the moment there's not enough information and you try and push the signal into this thing, it just doesn't know where to go, and it becomes noise. And the pattern of noise you'll see is this weird, moving around because there's not enough signal, and it's trying to do things it can't. And once something barely gets enough signal and the next one doesn't have enough signal because of the particle of smoke, you get this wiggling thing, which is noise. So that's the reason why. So in this case, I did the same thing with our LUT here. I made it fairly heavy, which means if you looked at it on the log, it would look quite bright, but the LUT was quite dark. You have to be careful going too much. You want to protect your highlights. But in this case, with images like we're looking at, it really was helpful because it weighed for a way cleaner grade. And I know Todd would not be fighting it too much when he's doing that. And it turned out to be perfect for this. It was actually, it's kind of counterintuitive. You think, I want to make a dark show. It's like, I'm going to, have my negative look really bright. Well, it's sort of, in the end, it actually provided, I think, a better color correction opportunity. So yeah, it's 1 o'clock now. So, what else? Oh yeah, Kim's asking about the looking glass in the pod. That was Javier's episode. That was all green screen. So, and they placed the green screens outside the set. So in that pod, there'd be a window with the green screens far enough back to avoid any unwanted reflection on the rest of the silver dome, which would obviously be a problem if you did it inside the room. You wouldn't be able to light very well. So you had these green screens very far away, and the sort of room had these big windows cut in it. And then they would, Tim would wear 2 GoPros on his head with his green or gray mask, and they would give us a partial panorama. Then they do HDRI, whole thing, the map on his head, and that's that. So let me show you. I want to bring up a couple of images here. Christina, thank you very much. I don't know if you're listening, who's helping prompt these questions. And she said this would go quicker than you think, and she's definitely right. Anyway, so there we had all these worlds, and we start making the show, and big sets and all kinds of fascinating things like Lady True's Vivarium and a lot of amazing things to try and create. And then we're tuning into the idea of we're not moving the camera as much, and we're even Chris is like sometimes, like he's a very good operator. He's got a good sense of things, but we're resisting the urge to move, and yeah, we're going on there. And then we get episode 6, which I knew was going to be a big episode, because it was going to reveal Hooded Justice's real identity. It was going to reveal who the murderer was in the story, but more importantly, it was going to reveal like the resonance of why this character is what he is, or up to that point. And like that type of origin story is always fascinating to do. And I was hugely honored to get to do it. And it was absolutely terrifying because we read the script and right away, Dame has been very specific about how when we get into this memory pill situation where the pills that, I'm going to find that picture in one moment. The memory pills that Old Man Will, is the one clue that she has of who he is this, okay, what are these pills? What are they all about? I'm going to bring up these compositions here. I'm just going to open these. These are some pictures from 102. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen again. And I think that's this one, yeah. So here's a few compositions from episode 2. This was the German War Office, and there's also circles, a lot of circles in Watchmen, as you can see even this. And we like look for ways to use that all the time. And mirrors, reflections. Well, we lucked out with this amazing, period magnifying thing on the German War officer's desk. So, we're over the corner. I'm like, and John Garrett and I are like, I think he's like, yeah, I think I can actually get that. Like, actually, maybe do a move, and you do a rack. We just got the right distance, and we're doing 2 cameras because we have very little time. So with the one, Chris's camera's going in over her shoulder, doing a complicated move to get in over the typewriter, and John's trying to stay out of the way and get this, crazy composition. And this one you've seen. Here we go. Here's Split Diopter. So this was like the early in that. So it's this in the pilot. So was the pilot? No, this is beginning of episode 2. So Regina King's character has discovered Old Man Will at the tree with a hanging Judd Crawford. Knowing Judd Crawford and knowing this is mysterious, decides not to take him in, would take him to interrogate him personally, which of course would be against the law, but she's, a lawbreaker. So we learn all these things in these moments, like she's not conventional, she has a secret identity, she's still a cop when we didn't think she was a cop. And so these pills are important. I can, hopefully by the composition you get the idea, they're going to play an important role. And more importantly, when the scene is cut so short, he's looking at them, he's gesturing at them, but he's really looking at her, right? He's like, they're my pills, they mean something. They're like, they help me remember is what he says. But he's like looking at her because he's like, I'm going to make you remember. My whole trip here is to make you remember, make Regina King remember. And we had a hint at this point, I'd kind of figured out who he was. We didn't have the scripts that far, but we kind of knew, and I think Nikki knew earlier. I don't want to out that, but anyway, I think being a pilot, she was probably the most in the know. But it was a great way to let that scene play because then he could, whatever he did, we weren't going to miss it on a rack. It wasn't like, look here, do this, tic-tac-toe. I mean, make the pill huge. The audience decides to do the work. And then you can note at the moment he moves and his eye glints, you're going to go, is that okay? So he's not playing this for us. He's playing this for her. And that was a great use of it. And that in the graphic novel, we can do that. Just leave it there, let people look around, and then they'll read the dialogue after. And it's the shot that I talked about before. Oh yeah, just those ones there. So yeah, then we get to, then episode 6 comes up and it's all about Hooded Justice. And it starts with American Hero Story, which is, this comically, it starts with actually Agent, the story movement happens when Agent Blake arrives at the jail cell, but the show begins with this, mock title of the other fake TV show, which is American Hero Story, where we meet, Hooded Justice, who's been taken in for questioning, and they're going to try and bribe him because he's, homosexual, and it's the 50s, it's frowned upon, and and he basically beats the crap out of the two guards. Where's the stuff here now? Oh yeah, so this is why is take a couple of these shots here. This sequence was really, really hysterical to shoot, and but also very tough because it had to be done in one day in a small set. So I have to remember to share on my screen, or I'm gonna talk to you while you're not seeing anything. Here we go. So I think I'm sorry if I can't remember who asked this question, but yes, this is a split diopter shot. So that's a real mirror there at the desk opposite him, talking to him, and we just did that for real and got it to line up right. And it's hysterical. It looks like it's totally a comp, but it's not. It's a split diopter shot with a split right down here. And we did the same thing. We just swing and tilt lenses for things like this, so we could rake across these two, rather intimidating but also over the top police officers. I mean, their behavior is everything in this world is exaggerated. The villains are exaggerated. What they do is exaggerated, and what our heroes do is exaggerated. And they to have, again, split diopter was kind of fun. Or swing and tilt, let them both be in focus while they're trading barbs and trading the little jokes about Hood Justice being gay. There he is with that. And and this kind of thing would also felt like a comic composition. We did an overhead shot during the fight, but we had to do the entire thing in a day, including all the dialogue, which is about almost 4 pages, and the big fight. So it was quite something. And hats off to Justin Reimer, by the way, for this episode, our stunt coordinator. I think he's on my Instagram feed. Great stunt coordinator, great guy, and this was like, this was like the ultimate challenge to do this episode with all these continuous feeling shots. So let me go into this now. And actually, I'm thinking about at some point with this episode, I'm gonna maybe do a little commentary. So Zack Snyder did a fun where he just basically recorded himself talking about one of his films while he watched it, but you don't see the film, so it's a non-copyright thing. It's just basically him describing the process. And I might do that with this episode because it's there's just so many things to sort of uncover. But anyway, it was suddenly a total gear shift. We're suddenly dealing with a completely different mode and way of trying to tell the story, because we're becoming very subjective. So we start off in this TV show, then we're sort of a normal shooting as Agent Blake shows up and informs Regina King preemptively, because Damon, again, brilliant with the layering it so everyone understands what could happen. You might go insane, you might die, you've overdosed on these memory pills, or other people's memory pills, you're not supposed to take those, you can go crazy, you'll jump, memories can jumble around, memories will be from different places, giving us license to do that in what we see, and also to help the audience, connect the dots in what we're seeing. So here's some frames for this. And so we had to suddenly answer the question, what's the subjective camera going to be like? Didn't want to do, 1:15 p.m. There you go. I did not want to do, so I'm sharing the screen. So this is just a few frames from this episode. I thought it seemed right to not, wiggle the camera in any way, to sort of really feel like you're floating through something, especially to feel like you're not connected to the floor, or to, to have an omniscient view through what he's experiencing. Because moving that way, even without him in the shot all the time, and going in and out of his point of view, and sort of just floating through the world, because of the way the story cuts, it's sort of there's an emotional through line. He's somewhere else, this is happening. And also there's going to be so many details to watch, and having an image which is more steady, it's easier to pick out those details. Here's him having his makeup applied. There's a scene before. It's almost him crash through the window. Let me just talk about one of these. So here's, this is the great table scene where this was originally, I think, which was 4-minute takes, I think. We think we did 26 takes, not all complete on the day. We tried a couple different paces with the camera circling the table, and one with a reverse. We basically changed our tack. We tried one, it meant too much circling, so we went with a circle, and then we stayed in this 3-shot, so we could end up in, this kind of 3-shot here for a much longer time. And then we would go in and lose a character, and Regina would hot swap with I'm just blanking. I'm so sorry. This is embarrassing to not have his names. Jovan. So Jovan would step out. She'd step in, all choreographed. So it's like boom operator, dolly grip, camera operator, Pee-wee, moving a chair, all shuffling around this table. And so to figure out the timing of something like that with all the dialogue, what we did was, which is something I'd always wanted to do, which we do sometimes for visual effects scenes, is to really previs what we're going to do. So I'll show you a little previs of that. It's another shot with a comp of something that's from the pilot. Now, to make this shot work, because the camera's moving, the grass is real, the kid is real, everything there is real, and the background is also green screen. And we built this grass into the set, and then we just windowed it with the color so that he could, visual effect it treat differently. But that way it's all live. It's just this weird physical blending into something. And a physical blending, not an optical effect, really makes you think that reality's bending, I find, because it looks like, well, I'm picking up a strange object or seeing a strange transition physically. It's different than seeing, you know, a visual effect that might show its edge. Yeah, I'm gonna do this. Let me just I'm gonna jump out of this for a second. And so I pitched to Stephen. I was like, well, one thing we should probably do is, you know, obviously we're going to be doing, you know, 1 or 2 shots a day or 3 shots a day if they're going to be all 3 or 4 minutes, and they're going to be really tricky for me to figure out how to execute with the, you know, crane and lighting cues, because if the camera's going to move and choreograph exactly to get to these specific compositions, but also float, we don't want to be doing all that while we're working out the timing of dialogue, what line could be off camera. So what we did was we basically once we picked our locations and picked rough ideas, I took out, you know, the Artemis with the video stuff on, video format on it, and basically ran through the scenes. And we had 2 stand-ins, Lyndon and Joel, who were mostly off book with their scripts, and sometimes, you know, Ben, our second year, wherever else was around, you know, do that. So we even did the opening transition, if you remember, the transition into the, here's like the poor man's edit. This was, I'm going to share the screen again. This is just off my iPhone, and this was like sort of a proof of concept of like, okay, can this work? When we put 2 scenes together with this amount of stuff, what will happen? So, and we're in the actual set. So she's playing Sister Knight. I don't know if you can hear the sound of this, but it's got the drums and everything, and she falls down, and we were going to cut to that. We ended up cutting to her back in the end, but the drummer would be over there like he was in the cell. And now we're on a stage of a place we're looking. There's our Wayne, our VFX art, Christian, production designer, making his cameo. And then we go by the giving the speech for the graduates, seeing some stuff over there, coming back, seeing the banner, placing our time, placing that he's a police officer and this graduation. At this point, we've already swapped, and now London would be Jovan as the younger version. We go into a match cut of the uniform, and then we don't even notice there's a cut there, and we pull back out. And so we've just been walking around like this with, you know, Steve and I, and be able to look at them and sort of figure out where the timing should be. And we pan off to see June, Eric, our assistant art director down there, and we come back just in time to catch the officer not giving him his badge, and there's Ben saying the lines. And so this sort of gave us the idea, oh, this could feel right. And then I get a chance to like, okay, now to find a location we can fill with the small amount of extras, see all that, what kind of crane, where we can get it, how do I light it, which obviously for everyone who lights, the cinematographers, these kind of shots are tricky. You know, the camera's passing in front of people. And we did it for the entire I have almost the entire episode here, I think. I don't know if I can have to unshare and share it at the next one. But it was a fascinating process, and it allowed for us to have the time, you know, to figure out what would work, what felt right. And then we could plug them, add the 2 of them together. It's like, oh, yeah, this is gonna work. This transition will work. And I think I feel right about what I'm seeing dialogue-wise, not. And for Stephen, it was great. And, you know, the actors, you know, I mean, they were doing 4-minute scenes with incredibly intricate cues, and never missed a beat. I mean, never complained. You know, everybody, and also looking around, everybody's in the same boat. I mean, me and Jim, the board up is on board up. I'm got cues. We're all watching, and it's like launching a moon rocket. Like everyone's got to be perfect. And in the moment something goes wrong, and we're like, oh, we bumped this, bumped that. Everyone's going, yep, okay, back to ones. And you know, no one wants to be the person to do it, but it builds great. It builds great kind of camaraderie for that, I find, because it gets everybody tuned in on, you know, this has all got to work. We have to get the whole thing. Okay, here's another transition. So I'll play this and I'll look at questions again. I'll make sure you guys have a chance to do that. So this is in the June's apartment, and this, I'm really proud of this shot because it was quite tricky. And this is when he's just come back. He has his hood. He's been attempted to be hung, which was another fun thing I'll show you after this. And we're doing a transition. So Joel is playing the role of who will become Regina King. There we go. Now we do the switch, which we just do in 2 passes, and then VFX blended it in the edge of her hair. And you're hearing me narrate my own stuff, which is kind of disquieting. There's a light cue where it becomes daylight. And then we see through the apartment, and then he wakes up. Yeah, always moving a little bit. I was like, again, to keep the camera slightly moving. I'll just skip ahead a little bit. She comes out. She gives him something, goes to the window. We changed the shot slightly, slid over more. We had to get to the end of the composition, because after this, we want to read the newspaper, we see all that, and then we want to get to the point where we come between them, which was very specific for Damon. We wanted the movie to play on the wall. I said, well, I think we got to put them in the foreground, silhouetted by the film from the pilot, the recollection that she's asking about. What was the film you saw as a kid? Well, it was called Trust in the Law, and then it comes up behind them on a lighting cue right there, and then we had to be able to push between them, and they're not very far apart. So we used and then it transitions into this. We plays the film for the pilot, blend within the film of the pilot to coming off the film another wall into the other scene, the next scene, which he's being dressed up as a justice. So that involved big lighting cues for day to night, and then I had to light them with the camera passing all the way in front of them and then going all the way behind them and then pushing through them, and I couldn't have people walking around everywhere because it would make shadows. It'd be too noisy. So we used a short Scorpio crane for that. It was a 10-footer with a mini lever head, a little small one. Make our camera super small. That way, it was just small. It was small enough that if we were sitting like this together, you could get it between us and within reasonable safety. And the dolly was on track too, so you had a little bit of motion with the track, and then with the pickle to kind of get the whole thing. A bigger crane might have been a bit too difficult to get the arm swing we needed. We took out the back wall, but not the whole doorway. Because by the time we designed the shot, this set had been built, so we had to sort of, work with what we had to some degree. We couldn't take the doorway away because we needed, built the following day, and we see it in parts of the other scenes we have to shoot. And it was really quite tricky, and everybody pulled it off masterfully. I mean, Jeff, the gaffer from episode 6 on, we had a manual iris, but he had to cover the little hole in the iris with his finger because it doesn't quite do anything. So to very carefully do the beginning of it with his finger to make this sort of iris thing appear. Otherwise, it would just like a dot appears, and it was that kind of dedication that it just makes you smile. Yeah, I wonder if I have any images of that. I think I do. Yeah, where is it? Just find some up here. I'll just open up all of these here. I'll skip over some stuff so we're not running out of time, and then I'll look at some pictures. So that's the hang scene. Sorry, I took too many of these now. I'm going through hundreds of stills. Where is it? Oh, maybe not. Oh, maybe I don't have them. Oh, never mind. Well, hopefully you can watch the episode. This is a scene that inspires this. Is he's a first black police officer, and after arresting a white man, this guy Fred, the other officers take matters into their own hands. They're sort of the secret white supremacy police, and they take him out and beat him up, and then they hang him and to scare him. And it's a harrowing scene. Like, to read it is already terrifying. And it was like, well, and I think it was in the script too, but trying to do a lot of his first person, so the audience would have this experience. The purpose of this, telling this story in this way for the audience is for us to really feel Will's journey and to feel what he's feeling. So that's the point of view, the emotional point of view, going in and out of real point of view at times, but we're always feeling like you're with his, what information he is getting and what he is feeling. So we built a little rig to hang the camera, and also he gets dragged to his own hanging, basically by his feet from the police car. And we just wanted this image. We could combine the rope being tossed over, seeing this one lonely tree, which looks kind of frightening, and him being dragged helplessly because he's been beaten up, and he's being dragged by two big burly men, and get them all the way up to the tree in one shot. Well, we couldn't drag the camera just with the body on it. You couldn't just drag a person over rough ground. We're in a real cemetery. It's rough ground and tree roots and things. So I asked Mackie, our amazing key grip, like, well, let's set you and Richard together and build a little rig that we can feel like we're on the ground, and they can still pull, and we can dolly assist and pull it a little bit. And oh yeah, here we go. Here's the hanging scene. So this is the shot I'm talking about. I'll just open these here. Oh, I have to stop it. Start it again. Sorry, yeah, you're watching me look at all that. That was I was warned that I would make that mistake. So yeah, here it is. You know, being dragged, and we want to figure out how to, then I can see him toss the rope, and it's all very eerie and frightening. And then you see their mysterious faces. These guys who won't know. And so here's I think I have a little video of the test we did with Mackey's rig. I'm just gonna close this stuff here. So I think that's which is the one. I think this is one. I'll turn the volume down. So here's the sort of what we see, and that's what's really going on. Okay, now that's the wrong one. One moment. Oh, 1 second. I didn't even share that one. Hold on. It's all falling apart. Here. Okay, so now I'm just going to share the screen. So that's okay. So I think this is the better version. So you can see the rig basically trying to get his hips low to the ground so he doesn't feel artificially high, as it can feel like he's being dragged, and allow Chris or our operator to actually still operate and feel like his eyes and get the lens right near his chin where it should be, and on his hands in the air, and also be able to have that it'd be pushed. And that's there you go. There's the desired effect, something like that. It's a tricky thing to build that low and not scrape the ground, and it turned out great. It's just a great fun thing to do in a scary scene. And then we also had to do the hangings, which was camera in a sort of being him and being hoisted off the ground. And I just wanted to prove that could be sort of done with this bag. We'll find the right kind of fabric so you can sort of see the texture of it, but you can sort of make things out behind it anyway. And the air breathing was a big note that I wanted to get in there to feel like his breath, as because he's gasping as he's hanging. Nikki and I had done an episode of The Killing where we killed a major character who was innocent of a murder, and it was a hanging scene. I never filmed a real like a hanging scene before, and it was harrowing. We were all crying at the end, so we also loved the actor. But Peter Sarsgaard's performance as this guy being hung, as his building panic was happening, knowing he couldn't stop it, it was incredibly emotional to witness. And when they put the bag over his head, because he was like kind of already panting and freaking out, the bag was like was moving like this. You could see his breath was doing this, and it was just like you're watching it escalate in force and speed as he could sense the moment of him dropping to his death was coming, and it was just absolutely terrifying. And awful. And I thought, well, we have to do that in this to really help sell the audience that we're in here, is have this happen. So our brilliant effects team put a little bladder, piece of scuba hose in there and some of this, so you could just get the bag loose enough. So we had to place the bag on the camera, get it loose enough but held enough that it could then be pulled off. It was on a rope, cable to above, so the operator below would frame the shot and then lift it up, pass it up to Chris, and we do it in the feeling of hoisting, so the performance of yank, 3 big yanks to get high enough, and then Chris could then operate the top part, and then he would drop it. Oh yeah, thank you. Sorry, thanks for bringing back on live. So yeah, so basically camera would be low, do operate the beginning of the shot, and he'd put the bag on his head, and then he would lift it up. It was on a cable to be pulled up and up, and we do it with the timing of the rope being pulled, like as if someone was yanking it and then yanking it. 3 big yanks. It passed off to Chris, who's on a tall ladder, operates the top of the shot with the monitor, so we can see the police officer in the car. We need some bright highlights to see through the bag, and then literally we say 3, 2, 1. We drop it after enough time, focusing on the bag occasionally. Tim, our focus puller, doing that, and then we drop the camera, and then Todd, the other operator, would catch it and get to the composition where it was something, and then hold it high enough, because we had to then, of course, have him come and take the bag off, pretend to reach under the camera and pull the rope into shot to cut it, which was the hooded justice rope, and do all that together. So the props go to wait till it drops. He would all get lined up, and they're actors now watching this calamity of puppeteers and hands and holding stuff, trying to act to the filter reflecting his face. I mean, in a very harrowing scene. It was I'm sure, a challenging thing for him, but it turned out great. It was scary to watch, and when you're at the monitor and you're cringing, and hopefully you're doing the right thing, I hope. I'm just going to see. Why don't I just quickly check the monitors here? Oh, we're running out of time here. We can go another few minutes. I'm just scrolling back at some questions. Oh yeah, that's right. So we're talking about, so that's that part of the episode. Of course, the other big challenge is it's going to be black and white, which was a decision which, again, came out of like, okay, we have one more world to create that's very specific, the memory pill world. We hadn't accounted for that in our other worlds we built, look-wise. And so I was toying with something where, like, maybe taking a lot of colors out except one. I wanted red to be there, because red was this one. Red's a very prominent primary. It's unusual. It tracks. It's like the red. I mean, it's like the girl in the red dress in the Spielberg movie. And then, of course, it's also references the Spielberg movie about the squid drop in the script, which also weirdly places it in episode 5. That dialogue that Damus sticks in there. Then you remember that, and you realize you're going to look for these red objects in our later episode, which is, again, the kind of tracking he's doing. So, and then at some point, I'm struggling with it a bit. I thought, well, it's going to be too much like the flashback, and we get a bit. And if it looked really artificial, if the colors are really weird, and then it was like, why don't we just go all full black and white? And I think it was like Damon and Tom were like, what about just go full black and white? And we're like, oh, well, that's definitely going to be different. And we weren't going to have to return to it. It looked like it was going to be this one experience. So we didn't have to do something where we're cutting black and white in and out of something else, which would have been really weird. So that could be good. It was quite late in the process, though, because we're painting sets. And I'm like, okay, quickly, I have to go look at the set paints colors with Christian. Because if you know something about black and white, obviously it's only the lighting value you're going to get. But you can have two things that can be very different to our eyes in color and have the same luminance value. Will come across as almost the same kind of gray. Hooded Justice also wears purple and red and a lot of dark colors, and I mean, he's in a night scene, so it's not the ideal black and white character for easy lighting, or for you got to be careful how you treat him. But it turned out to be a brilliant choice. And then it was like, okay, and what kind of black and white? And I wanted to go really high contrast, so it was back to Z Todd. I shot a little test with some of the paint materials, just make sure. When we tweaked a couple, like Chris and I were literally at some point, we're out of time. I'm using my iPhone, doing it, taking the saturation down. We're making decisions based on that, which actually strangely was not totally out of whack with what the Alexa was in terms of the black and white. We made some tweaks, and then I was like, okay, now how does it affect the lighting? Do I want to go with like a Greg Tolland, like high contrast, there'd be beam, I know there'd be some beam of light type stuff. But also I knew I didn't have the time to do like a really elaborate lighting with like lots of fixtures with lots of pools of hard light. Would have been probably not doable, because the shots themselves were so complicated and there was so many risks of shadows. A softer light that is in the right place would sometimes be better. So went with that idea, but stayed with what I thought the contrast would look like with that kind of hard lighting. So work with Todd. He built an amazing black and white light. It took a while, and I want to speak for him, but there's something interesting about black and white is when you only feed it like really, really extreme colors, it does change the tonalities of everything. And so it can shift things like the blue sky. If you put like a red filter in front of your black and white camera, it'll change everything. It'll look almost like on sort of an infrared thing at times. And so he did play with a lot, I think, with the red channel in making the black and white look. It's actually quite tricky to take all the color of things. You'd think it's easy, you just turn it all down, but you reveal other things in the signal sometimes. And anyway, it was worth it, because once we had it on set, I had a color monitor and a black and white monitor just to check things, and just in case. So we got approval to do it, but it's television, and everything is still growing and adapting. And they might decide, well, what if we want to put color in one of these scenes, or what if I have to make sure it can do for both. So I'm nerve-wrackingly looking at 2 monitors for all the lighting choices. how to do it. But and also the last thing, I thought, there is a dream quality to sort of a bit of diffusion. And I didn't want the thing to be soft feeling, but I didn't mind the occasional glow of things, because that's we go with a very strong lighting contrast, a strong like left contrast, and a bit of glow when it would just stay in the highlights and not infect everything else. Would be interesting. So I use an old filter for that, not a ProMist. I use a double fog, which is basically a combination of a low fog filter and a fog filter. But with the super heavy contrast, it actually didn't affect that at all, and it made for like a really interesting combination. So that was the genesis of that, as far as the look. Anyway, it's a black and white. And there you go. Okay, 20 minutes. Oh yeah, oh yes, because Cook Optics is coming up next. We're also with Cook Optics. Now, thank you for picking us up. I'll mention that at the end. Yeah, there's something else I want to mention about episode 6. I mean, it's just, the whole episode, every day was a massive struggle. We'd previous these things and literally be like, okay, Mackie, like, let's just take out the tape with the crane and sit there with Jeff. Okay, where can we hide things? What can the cues be? We did a 360 around a small table. Those were always challenging, obviously, but also because it was so slow and it's 21 mils. The camera's like right in their faces. And Chris had his arm all the way at the post, all the way at the top of his arm to get it to the height, because it was too low. We were looking at the ground in regular mode, and so it was a tricky one to do. And he's walking super slowly, but also because we're being lit by practicals with a 21 mil, there's no place to hide the lights. We're seeing the ceiling all the way to the back. So the table practicals are doing a lot of the lighting. There has to be a dimmer cue, because anything behind the camera is going to cause shadow. And a 21 map box is like this close to the actor. So literally, I think he put the room into 6 or 7 wedges, and Jim, our lighting tech, he's watching the monitor, like he's just trying to go, okay, this is the right one. Now we're on that one. Now, and like fade this one out a bit, and just trying to make it invisible. And there's no shadows, but that's tricky. And all those cables are on the floor, and there's people running around, and then there's flashback characters that come in color, and a Klansman shoots a woman in the background, and then the piano gets wheeled in through the front door off camera to appear after a 360. With which we then go into her back in a match cut to an exterior, putting the same piano in the same jacket. So Chris would sort of imitate the end of his move. And that was a typical, that was like, okay, a typical day. I mean, it's a 4-minute shot with, at least 9 people doing time cues. And yeah, but it was incredible. Like I say, it was an incredible experience, because the sort of camaraderie and the teamwork of, one mistake, we all go, yep, no problem. We all go back. No one would point a finger and be mad. The actors would be like, and they just, I blew it, shit, because they don't want to wreck it for everybody else. But it also made everybody cheer for everybody else. And so we'd be at the monitor. I think only once did Stephen get discouraged. We're on like in the take of the 20s on the table one, and even one time, and credit to Steve Williams, who was my first time working with, and is an amazing director and a fantastically sensitive human being and great with actors. And we had never done anything like this together before, and even separately. And at times, like, we're just going to go for it. We're going to design these as many single things as possible. And only once do we doubt, like, what if we don't get it? Like, what if we have to shoot ourselves out of this? We haven't done it yet. Are we going to know how to make a cut in this scene that's not going to look clunky? But I was confident we had enough time just to keep going, and we did, and we eventually got it, and everybody felt fantastic. So, don't lose faith. That's the thing. I'm going to just forget how long I have here. I don't want to extend anything else. Oh, there you go. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So I actually forgot to talk a bit about myself, just to mention. So I've been a cinematographer for a while. I am on Instagram. I'm at Middlecam. I don't use it very much. I sort of use it for this stuff. Although I'm tempted to put coffee pictures on here during the lockdown. I'm on off of Facebook. I don't really use Twitter, but Instagram is probably the best way to get a hold of me. And I enjoy sharing this kind of information, especially to people who are interested in what we do and the craft of filmmaking, which is an ever-evolving art form involving all kinds of things. And I'm a total nerd for it, and I feel very grateful that I've had a career that gets me to let me do these things. So, and I just have to say thank you to the whole Watchmen crew and Nikki for hiring me, and everybody else on the show, because it was a really unique thing to be involved with, and it was a privilege to get a chance to have such a big hand in helping craft it. And also Javier Grobet, my other partners, Javier and Alex and and Chris, of course, in the UK, and Andre, who shot the pilot and came and directed an episode, and we got along great. It was a real treat. And I think, oh, there's one more question. No, that's it. Yeah. So, oh yeah, and I also have to, before I forget, oh yes, Nicholas DePonce is here next week, and Iris Ing, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, if I hope not. It'll be documentary, and Nicholas has done some really interesting documentary stuff, like not just, don't think documentary is, you know, just following a person around with a handheld camera and weeping. Like Nicholas stuff is a whole different level of you know, image making and letting you look within an image. I guess similar to what we were talking about today, about looking into the complexities of big things to see story, which is another way to look at stuff. And I think that's, yeah, I think that's a good theme, actually. Interesting how these things are connecting. I didn't expect that. But yeah, I wonder what else should have had a funny anecdote onto Watchmen. I don't know. Everyone wants a funny story, but I always can't think of funny stories on shows that are so serious. Oh, Iris is known for verite. I completely just only talked about one of the filmmakers. I did not do my homework on that. So Iris is actually on verite. That would be actually very interesting. Then it'd be a good conversation about those things. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to quickly look for something else on my list that I didn't remember to talk about. I think I covered all that, actually. Oh yeah, Making a Murder. Oh, that's a great, yeah. Oh, that'll be great. That'll be more things to look into. Anyway, I guess I want to thank everybody who's watching, and I hope that everyone stays safe. These are very uncertain times, and you know, we all need to keep our heads cool. And a lot of us in film have faced adversity before, but it's inspiring always to see other film people get, you know, pick up the torch to help other people and inspire other people, and to sort of, you know, take that problem-solving energy into, you know, dealing with what we're dealing with now, because we definitely have a lot more of that coming. It's going to be definitely a little while, and there's going to be a really interesting discussion about how we're going to be able to work in somewhat like we used to, in ways that are, you know, with the guidelines countries and states and provinces will all give us, and to be able to do it in a way where hopefully we can maybe even improve some of the way we do things, you know, getting our work hours down a little bit, increasing the safety of, like, you know, everyone that works 16-hour days, you know, they usually get sick on the flu, you know, every time. Maybe we can get our hours down to, you know, what Haskell Wexler wanted, which was 12 hours. We could have healthier crews, and if no other time than now, to at least maybe make that proposal or talk about it. So I hope everyone is thinking about those things, and we can improve things from there. Now I'm turning into a long denouement. How much time do I have left, Jeremy? 5 minutes. Okay, so let me I'm going to find something else to talk about. Where's my list again? Yeah, and actually that was one of the things too that, you know, just to, you know, compliment my the other DPs on the show. You know, that's one thing we don't often get to do. We do in series sometimes is collaborate. In this case, there were 5 of us in the end on this project, and that's not similar to the Game of Thrones. There were a lot of us, and we don't always get to collaborate. And that's why this type of, you know, discussion, or, you know, even what the CSC and the ASC as well can do, and the BSC, is like that fellowship of solving problems, of discussing these ideas, of discussing, like, you know, the challenges and how we do things. I think is really valuable. And when you work with someone else like that, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. This is insane. You know, I remember Jonathan Freeman and I had a really difficult location. It was Jon Snow's office in Game of Thrones with all the windows closed. And I was like, well, the windows have always been open because it's basically a dark room, and shafts of light was how it was designed originally to be lit. But no, it was winter, it had to be closed, and we had to come up with some interesting ways to make the room have some mood. So I shot some tests, but both of us were kind of like, oh, I don't know how we're going to do this. Like, this is going to, you know, drive him crazy. And myself, and I shot first. I shot some tests, and I cut the slats bigger in the blinds. Hopefully, wouldn't notice. And if you lined up, you could actually see a little hot bit of light, and that was enough to hint at a source, which I think is what our eyes would normally see. But it took that thing, like, oh yeah, if I cut it a bit and we're not quite straight on, we won't know it's a little bit bigger, but we'll still see something. If it only looks black and there's no source in the room, and that's it. Okay, time to wrap it up. So anyways, thanks very much. And thanks to the CSC for inviting me. And I hope you guys can watch the show and enjoy it. It's pretty crazy. And I hope everyone can stay safe and be good. And I guess I've turned myself off. I think that's correct.